Traveling the Vortex.
We've joined the Doctor as he travels the Vortex, and don't defy me with the Pope. We've landed at episode number 268. I'm Keith.
I'm Sean.
I'm Glenn.
How are you guys?
I'm good.
I'm well.
Have a good week. Have a good Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day, belated to everyone.
Belated Valentine's Day.
Happy President's Day.
Yeah,
if you're in the U.S.
If you're in the U.S. and care about that kind of thing.
I don't get the day off, so.
Lucky federal employees are the only people that get the day off.
Had a nice Valentine's Day.
That's good.
I got Holly a key fob for her car, so.
Is she happy about it?
She is very happy, ecstatic about it. Because we've had the car for 3 years. When we bought it, it's used. It's 2009 Pontiac G6. And then we had Ponchos for lunch. That's one of our favorite places, just kind of as a Valentine's Day. We were running and doing so much stuff today. We really didn't have...
It's kind of an
odd
together. Valentine's Day being on a weekend.
It was. Well, and even if it would have been on a Sunday, and that was the other thing is my parents watched the kids Friday night. We didn't really want to impose on them twice, and so we didn't really do anything other than, like I said, well, we got to at least go to lunch together. So we went to Poncho's because Caitlin can watch Mason for about an hour by herself.
Yeah,
and then I had a Valentine's date with Sean tonight to see Deadpool, so.
Which was pretty awesome.
It was good.
That's what I've heard. We just got to hang out all day together. This was the first Valentine's Day where I didn't work that we've been together.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because they have always been on the weekdays, and sweeps you can't take off.
Can't take it off. That's right.
So we just got to enjoy the day together, which was fun. We did watch Man from U.N.C.L.E. last night. Last night.
That's a fun movie.
Yeah. It wasn't as good as I hoped, but it was really enjoyable. Then I made dinner tonight. Steak and twice baked potatoes and corn. What'd you and Mel do?
A whole lot of nothing. I was sick last night. I came home and just completely blah. And then got up today and watched all the lovely reports of people who were getting their pictures with John Hurt. Facebook's reminding me, hey, last year at this time, you were taking pictures over here.
Memories
in front of the
can
Hollywood
be kind
sign.
of rough, especially when it's something that's reoccurring and you're not there this year.
Yeah, rub it in. Yeah, it looked like everybody had a great time. And then we made homemade hamburgers and went to the movie.
All right, let's move on to news.
Well, speaking of Galley, there was some news coming out of Galley. During the Big Finish panel, Jason Hay Ellery announced that Lucy Miller is returning to Big Finish and Doctor Who, doing some short trip adventures. So Sheridan Smith will return for 2 special new short trips. There's not a lot of more details other than that, other than she's saying she missed Big Finish and missed playing Lucy. So you can probably dig and find more details on it, but hopefully more details will be coming later. Also announced was that Adriana Varma, also known as Susie, is going to be taking center stage in one of the Torchwood audios coming up.
They keep killing Susie?
She's not going to be dead this time.
I was about to ask if they were going to kill her again.
Maybe at the end.
Again.
She's
This one will be called Stop Killing Susie.
Moving Target by Guy Adams is what that one's called. One morning, Cardiff just stops. Rain hangs in the air. The traffic doesn't move on the streets, and people are frozen. The hub is on lockdown, and only one member of the team is free to move. It's time for Susie to save the world.
It's obviously set earlier in the...
Yeah, so that'll be in the second season of Torchwood's run, which they've been jumping all around, because there's going to be a Victorian Age Torchwood. There's one with What's-Her-Face, Yvonne, from Torchwood 2, so that's pretty exciting stuff.
No, Torchwood 1.
Was it Torchwood 1?
Yeah, it was the original Torchwood.
I thought Torchwood 1 was the manor.
Well, Torchwood 1 was, I guess you're right.
I thought Canary Wharf was Torchwood 2.
Canary Wharf is technically Torchwood. I just got the impression that Canary Wharf was the evolution from the manor to Canary Wharf, that Jack really kind of set up the second one.
So the hub was Torchwood 2?
Yeah.
No, the hub was 3.
They called it 3 in the show, right?
Did they call it 3?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
2 disappeared. 2 is the one that was in India or something.
Oh, so
just vanished one day.
But so Canary Wharf was 1 or 4?
I kind of agree with Glenn. I personally believe that 1 was the manor, but then it evolved into the Canary Wharf.
Okay.
But I don't know that they ever actually specified.
I don't think they did.
Maybe they decided numbering them was bad. So now it's Torchwood Canary Wharf, and they just went,
Well, that could be. It's the location instead of numbers. Because nobody other than the ones inside the organization at that location know where the numbers are.
Yeah.
It's like the Dillon stores here in town. No one knows what the numbers are about my dad. He'll say 43. I don't know which one that is, Dad.
I'd kind of like to see him go back and actually do a return to the manor. I think that would be
I think
really
that's part of what the Victorian one's going to be. I haven't looked too closely at it in fear of spoilers.
Well, I mean more of a present day going back.
Oh, that would be really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I'd like to see some Victorian stuff too, but especially Jack with the mutton chops.
You've seen that picture, right?
All kinds of excited over that picture.
Speaking of Big Finish news, recently Matt Smith said he would love to do Big Finish audios. He just hasn't been asked.
Hint, hint.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. Maybe they can approach him and get him on the show. In the same interview, he also said he's 100% behind Chris Chibnall as showrunner. And he believes he writes the Doctor really brilliantly. Our other bits of news. Recently, there's a huge toy expo somewhere. I'm not sure where.
I think this is where. I think this is New York. I think
is
New York
this the toy expo in
I think
New York?
that's New York Toy Fair.
And while I didn't see a lot of other Doctor Who merchandise revealed. A lot of Funko Pop merchandise, including they've partnered with Playmobil to release new series of 6-inch replicas of their little people, including the 11th Doctor and the 4th Doctor. So those will be coming eventually. At the recommended retail price of $15. I don't know. I'm pretty sure they will be individually packaged. Also coming are Marty and Doc Brown, Sherlock and Watson from the BBC Sherlock, some Ninja Turtles and Shredder, and Willy Wonka, the proper Gene Wilder version.
Oh, good.
And an Oompa Loompa. I don't know if I'll pick up the Funko or the Playmobil figures, but they're cute.
They're cute. I think it's a neat idea. The only one, and we talked a little bit about this before show, I hold some reservation for the Sherlock Watson one figures, because I think, yes, they're geared towards collectors, but on the flip side, when you take a show that is geared towards adults and market them in a primarily children's geared toy line, it doesn't quite set right with me.
Yeah,
so
it is a bit odd.
I appreciate the fact that people that are collectors will clamor to it, but it just putting it in a kid's line, to me, it's like making Freddy or Jason or somebody like that as a Playmobil character. That's not appropriate.
It's different from an action figure or something where you've got those lines that are designed specifically for the more adult collector. But
looks like it's going to be an experimentation to see how well they do, since it's the first in a series. Then our last bit of news is there's some questions now to when the Underwater Menace will be released in the U.S.
This is going to affect the schedule that I'm typing up now.
Yes. So this is also, because we also mentioned on the show last week that it was coming up, I wanted to make sure this was in the news. If anybody who pre-ordered it, like Sarah did for me for Valentine's Day, probably got an email that it's, according to Amazon, the release date has been pushed back to May 24th, as opposed to March 1st. Now, I have not been able to confirm this on any other website, because I can't find the Underwater Menace available for sale on any other website in the U.S.
I had
the main ones I've gone to.
I had an Amazon alert that said pre-order, and it took me to a page where I could click a pre-order button, but it did not state when it would come out. It just said it would be, you'd be charged when it did release. 2 weeks ago, I think it was. So
Sarah got the email Saturday.
There's that.
As of right now, TV shows on DVD.com is still listing it as March 1st, but they also have the disclaimer.
And they haven't
information is not complete, and they haven't updated it in a while.
Yeah, it looks like they haven't updated their websites, TV because that's where I always go first. They haven't updated it over the weekend, so there will probably be an update coming on Monday saying, "Hey, the release date has changed on this."
I hope the BBC realizes, or BBC Worldwide realizes, that if they don't do an American release, that's going to encourage American fans to pirate their copies.
Yeah.
I hope they're aware of that.
I would hope so.
We don't condone that. However, we would be remiss to point out that it does happen.
That's right, BBC. You'll release it or else.
That perhaps could encourage it. So, not here, but not with this people sitting around these mics. But
yeah, Amazon says May 24th.
Yeah.
Oh, it does say May 24th now, because a few weeks ago it did not have a release date. So
yeah. Well, it was when I added it to my wish list, it was March 1st.
Well, I should say when I clicked on the link to pre-order, it didn't say anything.
So it's hard telling when.
Actually, it did have something. It said TBA. Maybe that was in between when you looked, and they actually set it for March 24th. So I tend to trust Amazon knows what they're doing, so it probably is
usually
March 24th.
Maybe the animation ran long. Still holding that hope.
I'm going to do some more looking and see if I can figure out any more details. So I'll keep everyone posted.
You could say that, but the UK release is still...
That came out, didn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, it's still out, and it doesn't have... Not like they're going to do an animated special for the UK or the US release. What else?
Why not? They know we don't have the attention span for telesnaps.
I don't know about you, but this actually worked a lot better, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. How do we got in feedback today?
In feedback, we have feedback from Mark.
Long time no hear from Mark.
Yeah, Mark writes, Marmites and feedback. Back in March of 2011, I found a small podcast on the internet which was hosted by two lifelong fans and a guy who, due to his lack of traveling in the Hooniverse, did not get giddy when he saw Sarah Jane or chuckle wholeheartedly when the words reverse the polarity of the neutron flow were muttered by that nerdy IT tech who was fixing the old computer in the corner of the office. Now, 5 years later, I clear my afternoon and tune in to episode 267 of that age-old podcast in an attempt to catch up with the trio who brightened my days all those years ago. There, settled in my armchair and wrapped up warm in my favorite dressing gown and slippers, I allowed the hour to pass uninterrupted except for the many nostalgic laughs, not once reaching for my phone to check the time. Then the strangest things happened. The trademark "the guys hurry to wrap things up" conversation happened, and soon after the Doctor Who tune played through what sounded like a flute. I pondered. Perhaps time escaped me, but quickly my excuses for lost time were squashed by the revelation that the podcasts were now only an hour long. I did not need to clear my afternoon for a 3-hour running time. Instead, I could have used it to fill the silence on that afternoon's commute home. It was in that instant that I realized that I had been away for far too long. Whilst the voices remained the same, the structure had adjusted. I had missed out on a huge move in TTV history. I also found that the man who was once a rookie is now the captain of his local Who precinct. Yeah, that analogy doesn't hold up. Let us leave that one alone and call the end to this feedback. Guys, I love catching up in our latest episode, and I will attempt to join you for Friday Night Who this week. Thank you for all those years of entertainment which you provided to me, and for the help you provided in my personal life and my college days. Here's to more years of TTV. All the best. Your number one fan, Mark McMarmite.
Thank you, Mark.
Good to hear from you, Mark.
So long. Yeah, Mark, we have kind of molded and shaped and evolved this podcast into something I think is a little more...
New series.
Well, yeah. a little more palatable for gathering new listeners. As we kind of did this show, I sort of realized that when you run a podcast that's 3 hours long, it's quite a bit of a turnoff, especially when the majority of podcasts out there do average about an hour. And I think it's always been our goal to rail these back to an hour. And I think we've kind of comfortably split, they aren't always an hour. Sometimes they're an hour, sometimes they're an hour and a half. We have been known to go 2 on occasion when there's some heated discussions and lots of things going on. But we have certainly kind of tried to curtail, though. That being said, now you can go back to listening to them on your 1 hour commute because it will nicely fit into that slot. Not to mention, as you go back and catch up on all the shows that you've missed over the years, you'll be able to get through them a little faster. So you won't have to slog through 3 hours of us talking about nothing. So it won't be Seinfeld anymore. But we're glad you're back, Mark. Thank you so much. All right.
Shall we move on to our review?
Let's do.
The Crusade. The TARDIS arrives in the 12th century Palestine, where a holy war is in progress between the forces of King Richard the Lionheart and the Saracen ruler Saladin. Barbara is abducted in a Saracen ambush, and the Doctor, Ian, and Vicky make their way to King Richard's palace in the city of Jaffa.
Dun, dun, dun!
Yep.
Which is difficult, because I feel like if it was just the story...
If it was just the TV version.
If it was just the TV version, it may not get quite as strong of a dun-dun-dun. Because it's a historical... And my thoughts on historicals are kind of that they tend to be, I don't know, a little bland. Sometimes a little too educational.
This one doesn't seem as educational.
I
don't know if it's having Vicky there instead of Susan. I don't know if that's a difference because the Doctor and Vicky's dynamic is so much different, or if it's the setting. Or I don't feel like I walked away knowing more about the Crusades than I did going into it. Whereas some of the others, it does feel more like that.
Yeah.
Like the Reign of Terror, it feels like they're trying to educate you about it. Whereas if you don't know who these people are kind of going into it, I feel like you'd be kind of lost.
Yeah. And again, not that that's a bad thing necessarily.
No. I mean, you can pick up through context clues who these people are, but the gravity of the situation that our characters are kind of thrust into, of the situation that they're going through, I don't know if it would, in the televised story, would be telegraphed as clearly.
And it may be that they didn't feel the need to hammer some of the educational points home as much because
it's so much further in the run.
Well, and it's
season 2 at this point.
It's an English show.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking about King Richard. I'm pretty sure that was covered in school.
Yeah.
You know, they may not have felt they had to.
I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think what they do is when they deal with something that's historical, that's probably taught in schools in England, especially in the 1960s. I don't think they felt like they needed to. You guys talk about this educational aspect that I've never seen in Doctor Who. I mean, I really haven't. In fact, they play very fast and loose quite often with the historical accuracy of Doctor Who, and they always have. I think what they do, though, is that by putting it in familiar trappings, at least familiar to school kids of the day that do recognize who Richard I or Richard the Lionhearted is and know the history, then putting in an adventure set in that time, they maybe find a new appreciation or understand a little bit more of the dynamic is what I think they were going for. The fact that Richard wasn't this evil tyrant that was going down completely trying to take Jerusalem by storm. At least that's the perception that you get from this. That there was a element of Richard wanted to conquer, but he also wanted to conquer through peace. And I think that that's the thing that you're meant to learn from this, is that war, it's more of the moral of the story and not necessarily the history of the story. It's more of the fact that the Doctor, gives us that little nugget of, he'll find Jerusalem, but he'll never hold it. And that in fact is what happened.
Yeah.
So I think what it does is it kind of soft sells the idea of it soft sells the idea of the struggles of war. It soft sells the idea of the pain and the torment and the difficulty and the politics of it. I'm marrying off his sister. It's those little elements I think they expect to teach. It's not necessarily the history aspects, because quite frankly, this one really deviates from Richard I as far as a historical figure. So,
right.
And that's exactly Right. Have said because it's a television show in England in the 1960s, you're probably already expected to know a lot about Richard.
Right,
first.
yeah. And this has always been a time period that I've always been fascinated by anyway. I've really been drawn to the struggle between Saladin and Richard. That just seems like these are two fascinating characters that were locked into this struggle. And I think it's ripe for this kind of storytelling when you can plop your character down in the middle of the fight and have them interact with both of them. And, as far as the educational aspects go, I think when I say the educational aspects, I mean more in the way that I'm sure Sidney Newman meant it when he says, we'll do a Bug-Eyed Monster episode and then we'll do a Learn 'em Something episode. Or at least get them interested in history. And again,
yeah, because I think this story definitely would, a younger Keith would be spurred to go learn more about King Richard and Saladin. Because even now, I still don't know a lot about the Crusades in general, despite having watched Kingdom of Heaven not that long ago. But that helped me going into this story, on kind of placing it and what's going on in this situation. Because even in the story itself, I don't think it fully explores why they're going to war and why they think this is such a big important thing of why they're fighting.
Well, therein lies the point is that they're not necessarily teaching, but they're inspiring kids to go and find out more about Richard first.
Yeah.
So.
And that's I don't want to put this. That's the crux of it. With if it had been just a television episode, and again, I don't want to give the impression that I don't like historicals. That's far from the truth. I do enjoy them. I just think they're a little drier than especially the early ones with Hartnell and crew. They just tend to be a little. Okay.
Well, if the history of the show is any indicator, they did start doing away with them by the time the Second Doctor came around. No. And I think that's
there's a reason.
I think there's a reason for it. Is I think they realized that number one, they were probably playing fast and loose with the facts, and number two, they probably weren't as interesting as the Bug-Eyed Monsters or the space and the Daleks and the Daleks and the things that came with that. So they were certainly evolving into a different audience, I think.
But if we were focusing on...
Or different audience tastes, I should say, not necessarily a different audience.
If we're focusing... Well, and how much of that is, quite frankly, due to the Daleks? If the Daleks hadn't hit
if it
the way that
they
did, maybe the historical formula would have stuck around for a lot longer because there wasn't that clamoring need to merchandise them. I don't know. But if we're dealing with just the television story by itself, it's an okay story. It's the book that sells it for me.
It's really good.
Unfortunately, the issue for my reviewing of the story is it's hard to separate the two. Why do I enjoy the story so much? Is it because I read the book before I watched it, or is it because it's an enjoyable story?
I think both.
But based on looking at just the TV story.
Looking at just the TV story, I can honestly say I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much as I did had I not read the book first. Had
the two parts been fully there, do you think that still would be the case?
Or animated. Yeah. We Keith and I have kind of discussed our perceived limitations with a Telesnap episode.
I think I tend to do better than you do.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I'm grateful that they're there. I think it's cool that we have anything.
Yes.
And behind-the-scene photos to that extent that we're able to put something together.
In the second episode of this one, there was hardly any reused photographs.
Yeah, there was a lot that had been taken there. So that from a just the nature that they have that.
Yeah.
I can't think of the word that I'm wanting. That is amazing to me that they had somebody to take photos on the set.
Oh, yeah.
They took that many photos on the set, and that they were able to put this together the way they did.
Let's be clear. Those aren't photos taken on the set. A telesnap is a photo taken off of a video screen.
Okay, yeah.
So that's what that is. So that's not necessarily somebody on set snapping pictures, as we see quite often with Marco Polo. There were actually photos taken on the set, taken for publicity. And we'll do a lot more when we actually go into there's a book, really great book, and I've only just scratched the surface of it. But there was a guy that actually his thing was he was taking photo snaps in order to just as archival purposes, as history purposes, and it wasn't necessarily something that was being commissioned per se, but fortunately he was taking them, and so that was the reason why we have these telesnaps. And I think that's why they kind of eventually, you'll notice when we do recons, they've kind of end up reusing a lot of things because they don't have as many as they do from certain particular episodes. Yeah. So we're very fortunate that in the case that this happened, and without going too deep into territory that I don't know that much about, that's kind of we need to focus on the idea that it's not lucky that they were there on the set taking pictures. We are lucky that somebody was taking telesnaps that could then be sold back to the BBC or sold to whoever was marketing this. So that was the purpose and intent of that. And I think the reason why eventually they didn't take as many is because of the fact that they weren't utilizing them as many as he was, taking.
Yeah.
So he probably felt like he didn't need to put as much effort into later shows when he was taking telesnaps. So,
for the same reason that we're lucky we have the audio.
Yes, which is completely a fan thing because, in fact, I'm very grateful the BBC has bought back a lot of this audio that fans, and there's really only about a handful of fans that recorded this in their living room on these very old audio recorders. Is the reason why we have a lot of the surviving audio. And they were able to sell it back to the BBC and for archiving purposes and clean it up and make it usable. And even some of the recons in the early days that the original groups that were reconstructing these was that raw audio that was really difficult to hear.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys noticed in the first loose cannon version we had, the audio is a lot more raw and less structured. And I actually turned my TV up for that particular episode. The last one that we had, which was the second reconstruction, the audio I thought was a lot clearer and crisper. So.
Well, and even in advance to Friday Night Who, I popped in the Lost in Time disc and kind of wanted to see how they presented that. Watched the first episode and started the second, and the audio in the second one, and that one too was also pretty rough.
So, and the audios could have come from different sources as well.
Yeah.
So that could have been the case in that situation. From my perspective of this, and I'll share a little bit because I think I watched this reconstruction a couple of years ago, and I coupled it with I watched the recons, I watched the episodes that do exist. I also did the BBC radio audio that they call it radio audio, but it was basically a reconstructed soundtrack that had all of the parts, but was then linked with narration by William Russell. And so you could kind of visualize what was going on in your head with help of him narrating the in-between things that you didn't know what was going on. And I remember watching the recons for this, and this was probably only my second or third recon, actually sit down from beginning to end and watch a recon. And I remember struggling with the story and not being able to follow it as well, and being able to follow very well the stuff that survived. But when we got into the reconstructions, but having a tough time struggling with it. And so I found this time by you adding the novelization on, which I wonderfully, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but premonition to do, I guess, on your end, Sean. By doing that, I had a greater appreciation in watching this, even the reconstructions, and being able to get a lot more out of it, knowing more in depth the story by relating it to the novelization. So I had a much better time with the reconstruction this time, knowing the specifics of the story and the characters and being able to follow it a lot better. So it actually just completely elevated my enjoyment of the television story by having read the novel and novelization and having to be able to put together the pieces that way.
I agree. I think that's where I come down on it. You asked, would I have enjoyed the story as much if it was all there? I think it would still be a good story. I still think it would be a fine story. But probably for the same reason that I have a slightly greater affinity for some of those stories that maybe not all of fandom likes, like The Invisible Enemy. It's because I read the book over and over and over and over
Which
again.
adds the added depth.
So there's that just little bit extra that, I have associated with it. And so this was kind of along the same lines. And, I agree with you, knowing what the story was, that when you get into a telesnap part of it, and it's like, okay, this is where this happens, or this is the part, they cut that out, they didn't have that in the, and you're able to kind of go along with it. I think it drew you in a little bit more. And I propose. I agree with you. I propose we do that from now on. If we do, let's read the book.
It certainly makes it. And this was your guys' first foray, with the exception of doing Marco Polo, which was the 30-minute reconstruction that you guys watched. Now we didn't review that, but you guys talked a little bit about it on
the Ice
the
Warriors
show that we did.
And then the Ice Warriors,
and the Ice Warriors, and we had one episode of Web of Fear, which was so.
Well, and
that's been kind of your
Abominable Snowman.
And did you watch the recon on that? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, but I've been a little more fortunate. In fact, it's a lot easier for me to watch telesnaps from their reconstructions from the standpoint of when I was reading along with Neil Perry and his wife Sue's books, Adventures with the Wife in Time and Space. I decided to kind of plow in and see the recons of stuff so that I kind of can appreciate Sue's point of view when she's talking about, because she's watching it for the first time as they've chronicled it. And the more reconstruction I did, the more I got into the ability to watch the recons and really maybe kind of follow them a little better. So that's been real helpful for me as well. So
yeah, and with the recons, you really do have to kind of, the tweeting along to the recons is a little harder too, because you don't want to miss any text that's going across the screen or anything, so you don't miss anything. That's the biggest challenge I have, really, with the recons.
On Friday Night Who, there was a lot of silence during episode 2 and episode 4.
Well, that just kept getting sucked into the story. And it's fascinating how many changes were made between the series, the actual show, and what he did in the novelization, because it's the same author.
It is. That's the fortunate thing, is that it's David Whitaker that was able to, number one, write the story for television and then turn around and do the novelization for it.
Yeah.
You get a lot more insight in what he perhaps would have, because obviously he would have written the story first. But it's something that he probably, when you go as a writer into something, you kind of have an outline in your head. You sort of have, you may have even sat down and put down a lot of notes with a much bigger story that you kind of whittle down into 4 television episodes.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see what he maybe kind of imagined when he went into writing the story for television, and what may have got excised from the story in order for time to fit into that, constraints of 4 episodes, 25 minutes apiece on average. To be able to go out and flesh that out a little bit more, and especially I think the final episode, which is ultimately the rescue of Barbara from Elakir, that just bounces off the pages of the novel. I mean, it's just, there's so much more, and there's so much more that Ian has to do in this, as opposed to in the television series. It's what's his name? His name escapes me, but the guy that has the daughter who takes in Barbara, and they hide, and he's missing the other daughter, and he's trying to, his goal is to avenge his family that were presumed killed by Elakir, and he kind of at the end shows up to save the day.
Yeah.
But Ian has done a lot of the legwork ahead of time, and that doesn't happen so much in the television story. So I thought that was quite interesting, that kind of broadens out and fleshes out kind of an act 3 of the book, if you were to bring it out.
The climax of the story really is the whole chasing. When you're reading it, I kind of felt like I could tell, okay, this is in the show. This is for sure going to be in the show. This is for sure going to be in the show. We've got the Doctor and Vicky at court. That for sure is going to be in there. We've got this little aside with Ian and Saladin. Okay, that's going to be in there. And we've got Barbara being, dragged along. They're not going to throw her on horseback. We're not going to see that part of it. But,
her kidnapping, I think, is drawn out and fleshed out a little better in the book as well.
Oh, yeah.
But it's the climax, when you get down to the end, that you did pages and pages and pages of Ian being staked out with honey and ants, and then convincing the thief to come with him, and
it all plays out the way it does in the book. It's just so much quicker on TV.
Yeah.
Well, I think his appreciation for Ibrahim also kind of comes across better in the book, and they can't do that in the televised story. And I think Ibrahim is almost as enjoyable in the television story as he is in the book, or becomes in the book. But he is a lot more enjoyable in the book once the character's fleshed out, and he almost, he almost kind of rectifies his means in the novel better in the novel of what he did to. I mean, it really comes across as this is his profession. This is what he does for a living.
Yeah.
This is kind of expected of him.
Yeah.
And he almost comes into it as and Ian should just kind of understand that this is the situation. This is what I do. It doesn't come across so much in the televised story, and so there's not as much redemption when Ibrahim actually helps him by getting the horses, and in the book, getting him to where he needs to be, helping him when he does knock out the guard eventually. Those kind of things come across a lot better, and so the appreciation that Ian has for Ibrahim is much better in the book, and I like that. The character of Ibrahim is fleshed out a lot.
He's a phenomenal character.
Yeah.
I mean, he goes very, very much from do nothing personal. It's just a gig. You got to do it. To, yeah, all right, let's go. It's nothing personal, but I'll go with you. You're going to pay me when we get there. I really was looking forward to the sword fight in the harem.
Oh yeah.
I kind of feel like we blazed through most of that.
And even
Ben Dahir, was that the dad that was trying to rescue the daughter? Well, ended up rescuing.
I can't remember his name.
Even the fallout of the rescue is kind of glossed over. Of all the harem girls that they rescued, it's kind of like, it's kind of over.
It really feels, in my mind, it really feels like David Whittaker, knowing what he could and couldn't get away with on a BBC budget, went to the nines for the novelization and tied up all those loose ends that maybe as a writer is like, I would.
Haroun Ed Din.
Haroun.
Haroun Ed Din.
Oh yeah, okay, Haroun Ed Din, yeah.
But just all those things that he wanted to, but maybe knew that, I'm going to tie this up in here because I know we're not going to get to it. Including one of my
John's
favorite bits.
part.
One of my favorite bits, which is Ian and Barbara on horseback.
Yeah.
In the setting sun and the very romantic notion, and she looks at him and realizes that in all time and space he will always come for her, and she leans over and kisses him. And as somebody who has always shipped Ian and Barbara, it's like, this is almost canon.
It's fascinating that you don't realize until you read that on the pages of the book that the television story, for all intents and purposes, I think fans have always just kind of come to the conclusion that Ian and Barbara were a thing.
And that's why he was so adamant of going to rescue him, or even in the TV.
When it's printed on the page, and you read that, and that's the Ian and Barbara that I think we've all kind of grown to expect, is that they even in extended media they get married eventually. So I think it's even eventually alluded to and canonized in the Sarah Jane story as well. But it's interesting to look back on Doctor Who in Ian and Barbara's time and realize that there was no romantic connection. There was very little of anything to hint to a romantic connection between the two within the television series. And certainly that was probably because of the restraints of what we could put on television.
Right.
I'm sure the no hanky-panky in the TARDIS has been a rule for a long time, not just in the new era when I think it was it Russell T. Davis that kind of said there's no hanky-panky in the TARDIS. I don't remember which one it was, but
Stephen Moffat then broke.
Well, yeah, exactly. And so I think that we kind of expect it probably because we're so far removed from it, or fans have shipped it so much because in the extended media it was very obvious. It was there. They connected the dots. It makes me wonder, or at least it makes it more obvious that it's not there in the original story, about the original television stories. It's quite interesting.
How much of it is stuff we want to read into it?
Yeah, exactly.
What we're projecting onto the
stuff that we think we're actually picking up.
Yeah.
But to have it, like you said, it's almost canonized, because when it comes from David Whittaker, who wrote the story for television, then turned around and wrote the novelization, to me that qualifies that feeling that there's more there than just a professional relationship between the two. So.
Yeah. Which, and maybe it started off that way. I mean, I think if you go back and look at Ian and Barbara in Unearthly Child versus
Yeah,
Barbara in the chase.
Yeah, it's very much
it feels like it's grown over the course of their time together.
And the thing is, even in the chase, they're gallivanting and having fun and taking pictures and things like that. But they've also grown in a relationship of a friendship as well. They've come a lot closer because of their adventures together. So
you can read it either way.
Yeah, you kind of. I mean, I think you still read the romance into it just inadvertently. But if you look back at it, it still doesn't even have a. It has a fun two people that have grown to know each other, having fun together element to it as well. So it can go both ways. So I think it's kind of interesting. I'm glad that we have come to a point over 50 years that everybody is sort of on the same page, that Ian and Barbara were in a relationship, or at least became romantically involved by the end of their adventures with the Doctor. I want to go to two of my favorite parts in this, and I think William Hartnell is such a joy in this, because number one, he's not cranky. There's no cranky Doctor in this. My favorite is Huckster Doctor.
Well, there is a little bit when he's berating the one guy.
So there's no crankiness in this at all, because he's very Huckster Doctor. It's great that he goes into this shop of this shop owner, and while the shop owner is distracted, he crawls under the table, steals some clothes, passes them out to Vicky, and then comes back up and says, "Well, I don't really see anything that I want here." And he is just completely laying on the smoothness with this guy about, how wonderful his shop is kept and how, some great things here. And as indirectly, the shop owner believes that, or is kind of trying to grease the wheels with the Doctor as well by kind of setting him up and making him, feel good about himself. Well, you're such a regal man, and you obviously know good taste, and blah blah blah. So there's kind of some give and take going there as well. But that, and then later when the Chamberlain is accusing them of stealing the clothes, only to then kind of turn the tables on the Chamberlain when he brings the shop owner in and turns it so that the shop owner ends up coming out much better, and especially so much so in the book, comes out much better, and the Chamberlain is made to be a fool right there by just the words that the Doctor says. I think I enjoyed that so much in both the television version of this and the novelization. More so the novelization, because you get a little bit more, but that was so much fun.
It plays really well on television still.
It does. Yeah. It really does.
And it's nice to see the shopkeeper be reimbursed for
yes.
a theft. That's nice too.
And then some, because he's making new clothes as well. So. And the Doctor keeps saying, just keeps one-upping the regalness of the outfit that he needs to make, so they don't make even more money. So,
I was slightly disappointed with Elakir in the television story. That when I read the novelization, it's like, this guy's full blown nut job crazy and very evil. I mean, he reminds me a lot of the priest from the Aztecs, Zekelkan.
I think he makes him even softer.
In a way, yeah, because Zekelkan is simply doing what he does out of faith and his personal belief in the gods, versus this guy, which is evil just pretty much for the sake of being evil.
Well, Elakir is because he has been jilted by love. He's been jilted by women in general. And so he has made it his mission to be just as vicious and evil to women and treat them, because he was jilted by a lover. I mean, he went as far as killing his brother over another woman, which isn't even touched in this. I think maybe there's a brief mention of it as they're trying to tell us, convey to the audience the character of Elakir. But in the book, we get a little bit of that backstory of him actually killing his brother because he was in love with his brother's wife. I mean, it's amazing that how they're able to paint this guy in such this malicious fashion in the book, and then when you watch it on the television, it just doesn't come across.
He's the bad guy because he has the scar.
Yeah, exactly. It's more of a visual medium, I suppose. He must be bad. He's got a scar over his eye.
It can't be gotten in a good way.
One thing isn't it the wife that gives him the scar too? Isn't it because
I think so.
He kills her husband? She ends up mutilating basically his face with the sword, with the same sword. There's so much there. He watched the TV show. Oh, darn. Oh, that's lost. That's true with any translation from book to screen. All this is the reverse, but
I think one thing that actually worked better for me on television than in the book was King Richard's speech.
Yeah.
Is so much more powerful when in the hands of Julian Glover.
Julia Glover's delivering it,
the writing was, that was good, but the way he delivered it, and it was pretty much word for word from what I remember from the novel. So that's one instance where the televised version is just going to win hands down every time.
The delivery, it
makes a huge difference.
It does make a big difference.
I think the passion he has behind it all is so good.
I think Glover made a terrific Richard I. In fact, I like him better as Richard I than I do as the Jaggeroth. What's
Scaroth?
Yeah, I liked him as Scaroth. Don't get me wrong. I thought it was a phenomenal performance as he did. It's one of my favorite stories. But I really liked his portrayal in this as King Richard. I think that this was the best thing I've seen him do in any medium, even as Donovan in Last Crusade, Indiana Jones' Last Crusade. Or General Veers in Empire Strikes Back. Okay, it wasn't in that much. Or Maester Pycelle in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
This is the
still have trouble reconciling.
I know.
That's the same guy.
You can see it in the eyes.
That's about it.
In the eyes, yeah.
He's much older now. He's just he does not look as he did 30, 40 years ago.
For Your Eyes Only.
For Your Eyes Only. Yeah, see, I like him in that, but that's not his best performance by far. No.
I figured you'd have been a little
by far. No, I think he performed much better as Donovan in Last Crusade than he did as can't remember his name in For Your Eyes Only.
I think Jean Marsh brought a nice element to Joanna too. In the book, she was. It seemed like she was written younger in the book.
I think she is written younger in the book.
And in the show, she has a bit more of that regalness to her that I would more expect from that character. But at the same time, it showed her interactions with Vicky on television showed more kindness.
More kindness and compassion. I thought the same thing when I watched it. Yeah,
as opposed to the book.
Christatos,
yeah.
Sorry. I had to be Keith. I had to end a bit. She has wonderful interactions with Vicky, and it was nice to see Vicky.
It could have been. I wish there was more of those interactions from the book in the TV series because their chemistry together was really nice.
Yeah, it was nice to see Vicky actually have a little more to do than I think what kind of typically befalls her.
See, I disagree. I think she's utilized much less in this story than she is in a lot of stuff that I've seen.
Oh.
For the first third, maybe to even a half of it, she doesn't say anything except for a handful of lines. She's relegated to being the disguised boy, or disguised as a boy, the ward, or not even a ward at this point. She was his, what do you call him? The guys that...
Page.
Yeah, it's not Page. They have them in Game of Thrones too. What are they called? They're usually knights. Usually have them. What are they called? They're
I think it is a page.
Vessel.
Like Page.
Anyway, what's his face?
That's sort of the role that she's portraying. But also, then he says, well, as he tries to defend the fact that they dressed her as a boy, it's because they were afraid that if she, going into this kind of territory, that they feared for her life, which I thought was clever. I thought it was a clever ruse. She doesn't say much until the doctor and her are sent away from the castle, and then you get a little more dialogue. There's still not a lot for her to do, and the princess does show her some compassion and get her out of probably what would have been a kind of an uncomfortable situation, because Vicky even bellyaches about having to do it, and rightfully so, in my opinion. But there's nothing. She doesn't serve any purpose to the story for me in this, and so having her do something is different than her serving any sort of purpose in the story. And I think
that's true. What about when the doctor's privy to the fact that Joanna's going to be married off? Anybody think there maybe should have been a little more outrage on behalf of Team TARDIS? That obviously we're in a historical setting. This is the way things are.
And shortly after that discovery that Vicky learns, the doctor gives her that line of "time must move forward." We can't change the past. It's a reworking of that entire speech he gave Barbara, and Barbara doesn't know the entire time. And I think Ian comes across as so much more concerned about getting Barbara back that he doesn't care if Joanna gets married off to whoever at that point.
Ian isn't even really that privy to
he
what's
gets
going on because
he gets that
in the television series he's already left to go barter for Barbara. In the book, I notice he is around when King Richard begins to entertain the notion.
Isn't that why he agreed to send Ian, even in the TV version, with that proposal of, hey, he can marry my sister?
I guess that's true.
Right.
He does take the letter with him, doesn't he?
Yeah, that's right.
So he knows it going in, but it just comes across that he cares more about Barbara than
that's certainly true.
Princess he's never met.
See, Ian, I can forgive that.
Yeah.
As crass as maybe that sounds, because he's in love and he's in my head, he's going off to chase after Barbara. Okay, fine, but I don't know. It seems like Vicky being a futuristic, take on it should have been a little more.
Well, I think you're confusing Vicky with Susan because Susan would have voiced her opinion.
Right.
Vicky, I think I get the impression that Vicky has always been kind of the doctor knows what's best. Vicky, I think, is also portrayed as even though they're about the same age, I think Vicky is portrayed more as an innocent, less mature person, whereas Susan could act immature, but she was more bullheaded about those kind of things, maybe more experienced about those kind of things. And I think that's why if Susan had been there, and especially if Barbara had been there, I could have seen some. The Doctor's not this incarnation of the Doctor ever. This is very much in line with the first Doctor, realizing that no matter where he goes, there are certain mechanics that have to be in place, and you don't change it. You don't change. You don't. There'll be a great when we get to. Not the massacre, the one that's set in Troy with the Trojan horse. What is that? The Savages, maybe? When we get to that, there's some really great, this is the way it has to be, and then reluctantly he has to go and involve himself and change things. But that's neither here nor there. In fact, it's interesting to see the dynamic change a little bit in that sense. But no, from the Doctor, no. From Vicky, not so much, because again, I think especially at this point, she was still kind of following along with whatever the Doctor, whatever the Doctor says is probably the most, and so she's going to go with him. And I think you're right. I think Ian is so distracted from his mission, and I think Ian, being a history teacher, even probably knows. Oh, he was the history. No, he was a science teacher. Barbara was the history teacher.
Barbara.
Yeah. Well, even more so, him being the teacher, kind of knowing, maybe even being in the male chauvinistic role of the 1960s, kind of expecting this was just how it was. Barbara was more of the progressive, I think, and she is shuttled off away.
All throughout most of their run, it's always been Barbara the one that's protested about these sort of things and historical stories, like in the Aztecs of changing time, and Ian's always kind of gone along with, well, that's how things are here. He just kind of rolls with it more than anything else.
So, coattailing onto that then, knowing that time is written and that you can't change it and that this is the way it's going to be, we know historically that that Richard is going to get within distance of Jerusalem, but he knows he won't be able to hold it, and he knows we know he's going to turn around and march out. We know that there is no marriage to Saladin's brother with Joanna, and yet the Doctor is in there fighting tooth and nail and berating his knight,
the Earl,
Duke of Earl, whatever his name is, and very vehement about it.
Leinster.
Yeah,
it's spelled Lancaster, but I think Lister.
So does that come across as a surprise at all that the Doctor's
not at all? And I think
pitching
because
that hard for,
I think he knows it's going to fail.
Well, that's just it. I think the Doctor, especially with the way he's portrayed in the Aztecs, I think the Doctor knows that time kind of finds a way, and I think that's even alluded to by David Whitaker in this book. I think it's this one, or maybe it was something else I read. Maybe it was the Drostan's Curse. I finished that just recently as well. But Drostan's Curse. I I think the Doctor knows that time's going to play out. I go to the whole idea that the Doctor, every time he berates somebody for trying to step in and change things, they throw it back in his face that he does it all the time. And he always comes back with, yes, but I know what I'm doing. And I've always been comforted in the fact that I think the Doctor, because he knows how things play out, and he knows what things can be manipulated and kind of, jiggered this way or that way in order to make things work to benefit them to get out of a situation, or to smooth the wheels to as far as in their favor, the time team. I think that he knows that going against the king would be detrimental to them. And so going with the king, knowing what the result ultimately will be anyway, it's even easier to side with the king and his ideas, knowing what the outcome is going to be. So no, it doesn't surprise me at all that he stands up to the Earl of Lister on the side of the king, knowing what he knows about what's going to happen. I don't think he thinks he's going to change anything by saying something that the king had already decided to do, because the king was going to trade Joanna for his knight, which I can't remember the knight's name, but the guy that with Edward, I think, with the other guy that had been captured, he was going to trade there anyway. So that was probably a fixed event. It had nothing to do with the fact that Barbara is also part of this barter. So I think he knows that the king was going to go through with this attempt anyway, and so that's why he sides with it, knowing that eventually it's going to fall apart.
So time being a river that you can maybe influence it a little bit, but it's going to revert to course at some point, and nothing you can do. Because, I mean, realistically, you can look at it as the very fact of their arrival. The one knight probably didn't make it historically. The guy that they patch up and drag back to Jaffa.
Because and save him.
Because they're the only ones that
he would have stayed there and died.
So right away we've altered things off the bat.
But
the life of one guy maybe is not enough to.
Word would have got back to the king what had happened, because Edward did get captured. So I mean that didn't change anything. Bringing the guy back really only validifies Team TARDIS being in favor of the king. It doesn't do anything for changing the events that happened. No. So if this guy had survived and went on to do something great that would have affected the timeline, then yes. But I get the impression that ripple did not affect anything in the course of the river. So no, not at all. Because the Doctor's done it before. He's done it many times before, where he has taken a position knowing full well what the outcome's going to be.
And it's one of those things that I think is interesting, that kind of like with you, I have to take it sometimes with a grain of salt and sometimes just on faith that the Doctor knows what he's doing, and that this is a time when it's okay to do it. Because you get certain doctors, the first Doctor, the eighth Doctor with the Web of Time, that absolutely not can you change this. And then you get other doctors that are like, and they kind of rush forward and change it, and you're just like, but what about you said that the space-time continuum and and so I think it's you just have to accept that, well, this is one of those times where he knows it's okay. Now, obviously, it's all needs of the story driven, but this one we're going to fudge this, and it'll still turn out okay, because that river's not really going to change course. And there are other times when
we also come at these stories in the perspective of hindsight, or foresight, because we compare the first Doctor to incarnations that will come after. Whereas if we were watching this in the 1960s, we would have no inclination to trust or believe that the Doctor's doing the right thing. So from that perspective,
the idea that he could change time in that aspect or anything.
Yeah.
Since he's so adamant against it.
Well, but I think that what illustrates Sean's point is that in the Aztecs, if you're watching this for the first time and you're in the early 1960s, and you've just seen the Doctor be very adamant about changing time to Barbara and Ian and Susan in the Aztecs, to turn around and see him then turn and appear to be, I can see Sean's point of view from that aspect of a new viewer back in the day for a first time, and going, okay, why can he do it here? But he was very adamant that it couldn't be done there, because we don't have that reassurance from later Doctors that he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
Now we do. And so that's where the perspective I come from is, no, I was totally expecting that. Or not expecting it, but accepting that. So
Not things I had a problem with by any stretch of the imagination.
Sure.
It's just interesting notes.
I haven't read as many novelizations as Sean has. I didn't have the benefit of having a lot of these books when I was a kid. I had a few. I think I read maybe Genesis of the Daleks. I read a Dalek book. Might even be Planet of the Daleks. I can't remember which one it was. I read one other second Doctor book, and I think I had maybe another fourth Doctor book. This and Abominable Snowmen, I think, are the only two of the novelizations that I've read so far in recent days. And I'm finding that the Target novelizations are quite a joy. And I'm actually excited to... And I know there's going to be some that we're going to come across, and they're just going to be probably as much of a stinker as the television episode was in our perspective. Maybe they'll enlighten me. Maybe Web Planet will be a lot better after I read the novelization. But I'm very jazzed and excited that we have decided to couple the novelizations with the reconstructions, because I think it will help color our perspective of what they were at least trying to do. Because if you don't have that benefit of having been there in the 1960s to see what the intent was, it's really difficult to stay focused on what the reconstructions are trying to do. And thank goodness for the reconstruction teams that have made the effort to put these together and make it available. So one of these days, maybe when we get enough recons under our belt, maybe we'll do a show on the different groups in the 1980s and 90s that were doing the reconstructions, because there's a real fascinating story there about the different clubs and groups and organizations that were getting together and showing these at gatherings and Doctor Who clubs and conventions, that were putting these together without any sort of coordinated effort originally, and then later kind of came together. And I think Loose Cannon really kind of picked up the ball and did most of them, which is why we have access to the Loose Cannon stuff. So that's been really fortunate for us.
I think, too, with the novelizations, it's one of the things, and having read a few more of them, you get ones that, like The Invisible Enemy, which I read and I love the story. But the story was written by, or the episode was written by Bob Baker and Dave Martin. The novelization was Terrence Dicks. Which, I mean, Terrence knows his way around a Doctor Who episode, and he knows how to do it. But he didn't really add anything to... It's
different when the actual screenwriter...
I think that's a really key for this one, is the fact that it was the screenwriter. And that David Whittaker was, going into it, knowing what maybe he wanted from the story, and knew that he couldn't fit in, or budget was, preventing him from doing, or length, that he was able to... Or
in hindsight thought, I could flesh that bit out a little bit better, or,
Yeah.
And I would presume anything that Terrence Dicks novelized, that he novelized from the era that he was script editor, would also help in perspective, because I think he would have had a better... Yeah. He might have been someone that cut out some of the story that came in front of him in order to be presented as a story. And so the other benefit I think that Terrence Dicks has, especially with Baker stories, is those guys were such good friends and often formulated a lot of their ideas and stories together. Yeah. So they're almost co-creators of a lot of these stories, and so it's probably a benefit when Terrence Dicks picks up a Bob Baker story and is able to put it together and put it in light.
Sure.
And I hope to eventually, in doing more reconstructions, add some of those audios with linking narration. I think that'd be a nice way to change up, instead of doing always novelizations. Add that instead. And
they're good because
see if we like them.
They're good because from a time, that's what I was sort of doing there 2 or 3 years ago. Is instead of watching the reconstructions, which I had difficulty with, I would listen to the audio linking narrations, and those were really helpful. So that might be a better way to approach these when adding that to the mix.
Especially since some of the Target novelizations are out of print and it's hard to find.
Yeah.
Fortunately, with the batch that's coming out, hopefully that'll do well. We'll get a lot more of them, too, so since they're reprinting these now. So
hopefully they'll do more of the lost episodes.
I'm excited to put another recon on. I know it's going to be a few months down the line, but I'm excited to do it and redo this and do it with another, do it again. And do it with another novelization, because I'm excited to be able to get into that realm, because it kind of adds something to our experience of Doctor Who as well. By forcing ourselves to do novelizations gives us one more element that we're probably less familiar with right now. So.
Yeah.
Well, it's high time. I mean, it's been 5 years. We should probably get into some of these missing episodes.
And
I'm also
novelization.
Can't wait for that Omni rumor forever.
I'm also excited to do more Virgin Missing Adventures too. I'm already 5 into those. So, all right, what do we got coming up on the schedule, Sean?
Well, coming up next week on the schedule is a return to New Who for Friday Night Who. We're going to do The Girl Who Died and revisit a Shielder, which should set things up very nicely for our episode next week, and which is the first of this year's promise to review all of the Traveling the Vortex book club books. So the January book for this month, for this year, was Doctor Who: The Legends of a Shielder by Justin Richards, James Goss, David Llewellyn, and Ginny Colgan. And so everybody should have had that read because it was January's book. It's now February. But we wanted to give you all a chance to read it, so we'll be discussing that and having our thoughts on that next week. And slight hiccup with the perceived delay of Underwater Menace, so we'll get some sort of confirmation on that. And I may have to rework this because we had initially planned on having that the week it came out in March. And so we may be filling that slot with something else.
Luckily, we still have a couple more weeks.
We do.
And the three of us will be at Empower Comic-Con this weekend in Topeka. We do encourage you, if you're in the area, if you're in Topeka especially, but if you're in the area and you're able to come to Empower Comic-Con, please do so. This is their first year, something that they've put together since September, which is when it was kind of conceptualized at TopCon. And I think they've been doing a pretty good job of throwing something together. I mean, I say throwing something together. I should give them more credit because they're really they're powering through something that they've really had a limited amount of time to do. And
they've gotten some good guests in such a short amount of time.
I am very impressed with the guest list for being a first convention. So give them some support. And that's if it's successful this first year, then it'll continue to happen, and we'll get bigger and better things as well.
Yeah.
So, not that Lindsay Wagner's a good thing anyway. It's a great thing. So, be sure to, since we're talking about support, please be sure to support us on Patreon if you're not already. Proceeds from that, donations from that come straight into this program, goes right back in this program, 100%. And so we get all of that. We're able to bring you bigger and better stuff as we continue to evolve our show. Also, be sure to click on any of those links that you can find on our website at www.travelingthevortex.com. Portions of those proceeds do come back into this show as well, and do go directly into the show, 100% of what we get, in order to continue this podcast. You can also reach us on various forms of social media.
You can find us on Facebook, Traveling the Vortex, Twitter at Travel Vortex, the Goodreads Book Club, which we mentioned before,
and Tumblr,
and Google+. And if you want to send us feedback like Mark McMarmite did, you can do that on our website with the Send Feedback tab, or you can send it directly to us with feedback at travelingthevortex.com. For your feedback, if you want to just chime in on the Goodreads thread for the Legends of Shielda, we'll be pulling that up to read some of those reviews as feedback next week also.
Absolutely. And if you were at Gallifrey One in California this weekend, please send us some feedback on that. If you want to send us audio, that'd be terrific. If you just want to write something up, send it in a feedback. Do it that way as well. We'd love to hear how that went, since none of us were able to represent the show this year. So.
And pictures.
Yeah,
yes.
We'll post your pictures.
We really like pictures of you and John Hurt.
Anything else we need to cover before we close this show out this week? If not, until next week, I'm Glenn.
I'm Sean.
I'm Keith.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Be seeing you.
Thanks for listening.
You have been listening to Traveling the Vortex. Doctor Who and all of its associated programs are owned and trademarked by the BBC. No infringement is intended or implied.